So I think after those two talks, I could sit here and ask you hundreds of questions, and we could talk all night, but unfortunately we're on a clock. We have to finish for the reception. So first of all, Jaime, you talked about empathy and an empathetic reaction. Your images are seen all over the world, but yet you also work with local communities who are very close to those animals, those ecosystems. Do you see a difference in the response to your images from those local people that you work with than you would from someone halfway around the world?
Yeah, there's something that has always surprised me is in some places, some very remote communities, they are very aware of the presence of species. I don't know, the military macaw in Mexico that I have always worked with, but for them military macaws are some green dots that cross the sky, because sometimes the habitat where they live is close from their villages. So for many people, especially women in the communities, yeah, they know they have the macaws, but they have never seen them close. So when you are shooting there and then you show them what you are working with, you can always see this look of surprise in the faces. So in a way, we are doing the same, but at a very different scale. We are spreading the word. We are, with images, we are trying to share the beauty, the amazing planet that we have with people. So yeah, to summarize, I would say that I am always very moved on how people react when seeing the wildlife that is in their backyard, so close, and with the detail that photography can bring to them.
Yeah. So that actually leads me on to you, Lucy. So you observe lots of different cultural traits in animals. Which are the ones that you think people might find more interesting, that would be grabbing not just to us here, but to the kind of general person on the street?
Well, I think I would echo that point, that actually what's often important is the behavior which we observe right there and that we interact very closely with. So the classic example of that is milk bottle opening in British tits. It's something which people have grown up with, which they have nostalgia for, and they remember, their grandparents have told them about it. And I think that's because it's done by a bird that we feel a connection with. We see them in our gardens and we can observe their behavior in real time, in real life. So those are the stories I find particularly fascinating, when animals have taken opportunities that we've inadvertently given them and run with it.
And Jaime, do you think the same? I mean, when you see the different types of behavior that animals show, and listening to Lucy, are there areas that you think, actually, I would love to go and photograph that and tell that story now?
Of course. I love animals. And there's something that I particularly like, and I'm sure, Lucy, you will agree. And it's they are individuals above everything. And when you spend enough time with a population of certain species, you start to identify very quickly the individuals. There are rascals, there are guys that are skitties. So that interaction with wildlife is one of the things that I really love.
You talk about individuals, actually. So, Lucy, you mentioned cultural inheritance, and this idea that you may have some individuals who are repositories of knowledge, who then share that learning with the rest of the group. And you touched slightly on the implications that might have for conservation. So do you want to just expand a bit more on that?
Yeah, so broadly, by cultural inheritance, we just mean the information that's transmitted from generation to generation. And it's a sort of alternative way of passing on information that exists in parallel to genes, actually. And when we think about that, the obvious implication for conservation is that we need to conserve the old animals in populations. And this is particularly important when we think about animals which are, for example, hunted, trophy hunting, or the larger individuals are taken preferentially, like in fishing, because we might be losing the individuals which have knowledge which is quite rare over the lifespan of individuals. So, for example, in elephants, we have a few individuals in herds which will have knowledge that isn't present every year, and so might only be important in a drought. And if you remove those individuals, then that can have implications for the survival of all the rest of the individuals. So I think it's something we need to think about.
Yeah. And Jaime, when you've been photographing animals, you're obviously always trying to create this empathy, create this link. How do you think you can move beyond just empathy and galvanize people to take action, to change their behavior, to make that real difference?
That's the key question, I believe, because as you saw in my presentation, I have experimented with many different languages of storytelling, and there's always this thin line between entertainment and engagement. And it's so easy to fall in the entertainment trap. Yeah, it's so much fun to watch these videos of pandas sneezing. Yeah. But we live in an era that we are saturated with images, with content all over. So we better do things that are meaningful. Yeah. So for me, everything basically relates to two things. I have said it: the story and the empathy that we can trigger on the audience. If it's a good story, it's gripping. Yeah. And if those images generate feelings of empathy, you have a good chance that your audience will commit to do something about the topic.
Lucy, have you ever seen an image that's really grabbed you, that's kind of galvanized you, made you want to study a different organism?
Yeah, I mean, I remember owning an old battered copy of In the Shadow of Man by Jane Goodall, and the images in that, I mean, they're just black and white, but were, I think, very inspiring to a teenage me that was interested in animal behavior. But more than that, I think the nature documentaries of our youth, the ones that we've all grown up on, the ones where you can actually, where the camera is put into the family group of the animals and you're seeing them interact and behave, I think that's really what grabbed me, is getting the sort of insight or the into the lives that are going on completely separate to you, and sort of closest you can get to studying aliens on Earth, right?
So, final question, Jaime. Have you taken any images that you took really for a particular purpose to make a difference, and actually they've failed, they've bombed? And I know you're a photographer.
Yeah,
I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, come
on. But I think it would be good to know.
I alone put myself on the spot every day. So, yeah. One that is surprising is I saw it earlier, the one of the monarchs. Yeah. And this is to praise the value of captions. That image of the monarchs, so many people sees it, and it's so beautiful. What are they, in the sand? Mm-hmm. Like they don't get the whole point, the whole story of that photo. And also, and this has happened to many of my colleagues too. I did a story on the cloud forest of El Triunfo in Chiapas. They are one of the most endangered ecosystems. You present this, and suddenly all the feedback that I was getting was from ecotourism providers wanting to create new routes in this pristine forest that, no? So it's not that I am against ecotourism, but I don't do those stories to promote massive numbers of visitation, which I have seen in other places. Yeah. No? So I'm very cautious with that.
Unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So Lucy, just very briefly, what do you think might be the really interesting areas of animal culture to explore in the next 10, 20 years?
Yeah, so I think that there are two areas which are particularly fascinating and just starting to take off. The first is trying to understand the interaction between culture and genes. So we know in humans that this has been very important for our evolution. Over time is that interaction. But there's now some example from animals like killer whales that this might also be going on in other species. And the second thing which I think is really fascinating is this idea of cultural adaptation. So to what extent can social learning and cultural inheritance of knowledge be a source of locally adapted behaviours in animals? And I think this is the one which is particularly interesting for conservation and for understanding how animals can persist in environments which have been modified and changing.
Yeah, I'm certainly interested in exploring that more with you guys. But I'm afraid we've run out of time for today. I could talk to you for much longer. So let's hear it for our speakers. Thank you very much for joining this conversation.